Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. It is my pleasure and indeed my honor to introduce our speaker tonight as part of this distinguished lecture series, Dr. Steve Younger. I could read you Steve's bio in his 40 years as a leader in this nuclear security enterprise, but I would tremendously infringe on the time that he has to tell you the story of this great book that he's written about the Silver State Dreadnought, the USS Nevada. But quick summary, Steve has had a very distinguished career for almost 4 decades, leadership positions at Los Alamos National Laboratory, in DITRA. He was, of course, president and general manager of the site here in Nevada, and now serves as the lab director of Sandia National Laboratories. And I recall there are 2. There is the large component in Albuquerque and also the one in Livermore. During that time, and it is the largest laboratory of NNSA, almost $3.7 billion this year. And in addition to doing all that, what amazes me is Steve's schedule makes me tired. He also is a tremendous author. I think you will really enjoy this book. It's a tremendous historical account of this warship that spans from World War I to after the end of World War II. We do have signed copies that are available outside. The gift shop has them right now. Joe tells me they may not be open at the end of the lecture if someone hasn't gotten one yet, but Steve will be willing to meet with you after this. But without further ado, it's my just true pleasure to introduce you to Steve Younger. Steve, thank you for being here.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for coming to hear about a truly outstanding ship. Nevada saw the making of the American century. When her keel was laid down, most of the world was ruled by kings and emperors. America was an agrarian society, industrialized, but still very much a small-town society. And when she went down for the last time, America was the undisputed global superpower. And Nevada saw it all happen. Before I get started, I want to thank Troy Wade, one of my heroes throughout my career, for coming tonight. I mentioned there are 2 people that I use the term maestro for. Troy was the first. It's just wonderful to see you, and so many people that I've worked with over the years. Jim Holt is here, who probably knows more about me than I do. Chuck Costa, who I mentioned a little earlier, he said he worked for me, and I said no, nobody ever worked for Chuck Costa. Chuck Costa, nobody was ever above Chuck Costa. So anyway, thank you for coming. I'm going to start a little before Nevada. The Spanish-American War of 1998 transformed America. Until then, we had been pretty much an isolationist country, but in that war, we acquired the Spanish colonies in the Pacific, particularly the Philippines and Guam. They were far away. We had to protect them. We needed a navy to protect them. And Congress had objected to having a strong navy because they thought it would tempt an expansionist president. But that attitude was changing around the turn of the century. And by 1911, the United States had 33 battleships in the water or building, which was an impressive achievement for an evolving industrial power. We had a real problem making guns at that time, or other things that required complex assembly. But the numbers were misleading because in 1906, the Royal Navy transformed battleship design with the HMS Dreadnought. And you see on the left, USS New Hampshire. That was a typical battleship of the time. There were 2 big guns in the front, 2 big guns in the back. Battleship Dreadnought had 10 big guns. Now, even though only 8 of them could fire on a broadside, but she was the equivalent in fire concentration of several earlier battleships. So every navy in the world realized that the British had gotten a jump on them. The United States Navy was paranoid that if it built a lot of ships like Dreadnought, well, somebody's going to come along with something new. And there was a not very subtle hint that that somebody better be the United States. So in 1912, around the time that the United States thought it could leapfrog this British technology, the General Board of the Navy, they were the group of senior admirals that were advising the Navy on what came next, laid down a set of requirements. They said, we want at least 10 big guns on the next battleship. We want armor sufficient to protect her against anything the enemy could throw at her. We want speed comparable to any adversary and sufficient range to reach our most distant territories. Now, normally in ship design, there's guns, armor, and speed, pick two. The General Board said, no, I want all three of these. So the ship designers put on their thinking caps and said, oh, and by the way, it had to meet a fixed price that the Congress had allocated. So the Bureau of Construction and Repair said, we can put 10 14-inch guns in 4 turrets. We'll use a triple turret, never been done before by the United States. We'll give it a go. They were going to use super firing turrets, which means one turret was going to fire over top of another turret. And that meant the ship could be shorter, which meant that it could be cheaper and you could spend the money on other stuff. At a time when most ships were coal-fired, she was to be oil-fired. Oil had a higher energy density than coal, so you could fit more range into the bunkers with oil than coal. And in a brilliant stroke, they said, why are we armoring everything on the ship? Why don't we armor only the things that we care about? It was called the all-or-nothing armor scheme. So they put all those things together, and the result was the world's first super dreadnought. It became the standard battleship design throughout the rest of the history of building battleships. So battleships got bigger, the guns got bigger, you added radar, you added this, that, and the other thing, engines changed, but the basic design of Nevada remained the standard for all subsequent battleships. Nevada and her sister ship, Oklahoma. Now, how do you build a better battleship? You start out with a sea of paper. There was a small army of draftsmen that drew all plans for all of the parts of this ship, of which there were tens of thousands. Now, the progress on the ship was remarkably rapid compared to today. As a matter of fact, Nevada, which was comparable in complexity to a modern nuclear submarine or aircraft carrier, was built in a small fraction of the time that we would take today. Congress authorized her on March 4th, 1911. The design was fixed by May 24th. We're not talking 10-year development time here. They knew what they wanted to do. The contract solicitation began on October 18th, and they selected the contract on January 12th. That's about 10 times faster than it could be done today. And the first keel plate was laid November 4th, 1912. No photographs, no fuss, no ceremony. Crew went out, laid the plate, got started. Progress was rapid. A couple months later, you can see the keel, which is this, and the vertical plate. There's the outer bottom. There's the inner bottom. Do we have to have a laser pointer? Anybody? Oh, Chuck, of course. Okay, thank you. I'll try not to blind anybody here. Okay. So there's the inner bottom, there's the outer bottom. By the way, these are men, so you see these, this is big. This is big. That's just the start of the bottom. By April 1st, the sides were going up. So you see a lot of wooden planking, but here's the side. You see some bulkheads going in. While this was happening, the Bureau of Ordnance was testing out this concept of a triple gun turret. That is, was actually going to work, was firing of 2 guns going to throw off the aim of the other gun. They were concerned about turbine engine technology. The United States Navy did not have a happy history with turbine engines. So they decided, okay, we'll mount turbine engines in the Nevada, and then we'll put reciprocating engines, the old-fashioned kind of engines, in the sister Oklahoma. Now, the turbines were challenging. The blades were 11 feet in diameter. They had to be positioned within thousandths of an inch, and for the technology of the time, that was hard. There were 6 boilers that powered the turbines, pressure of 295 pounds per square inch each. Each boiler had 1,092 tubes running through it to make the steam. So this was a hugely complex thing. I love this picture because it shows, a lot of times you see pictures of very famous people. This is a picture of 2 ordinary workmen. This is the bow of the ship. They're just about to put on the bow stem, which is a cast piece at the very front of the ship. And the resolution of the photos at the time mean that you can blow this thing up and have portraits of the individuals. Now, she was christened on July 11th, 1914. It was a gala affair. On the left is Secretary of the Navy Josephus Daniels. In the middle is Eleanor Ann Siebert. And on the right is Governor Tasker Odie, Governor of Nevada Tasker Odie. Eleanor Ann broke a bottle of Mumm's champagne from Reims, France, on the first swing. This is important. You have to break the bottle on the first swing. The original Dreadnought, I think it was King Edward VII, swung a bottle of Australian wine. It didn't break. Dreadnought grounded on the way out of the yards on the first sortie. So, as a matter of fact, a special telegram was sent back to the Navy, and she was built in Massachusetts. A special telegram was sent back to Washington, assuring them, yeah, the bottle broke on the first go. This is her entering the water for the first time. 8 tons of grease smoothed her way. A series of chains and ropes were attached to the hull, and as she slid backward, those chains and ropes would stretch and then break, slowing her down. That was big because she was launched into a river, and if she went too fast, she'd just go over on the other side and ground. Sometimes people think, well, the ship was launched and then she's ready to go. Well, this is what she looked like after launch. There was still a lot of work to do. You notice she's sitting really high in the water. And if you can see this light patch here, that's where the armor would go. That's wooden planking, and that tug is moving her into position. They didn't waste an hour to get her going. So 15 months after launch, here she is getting ready for engine trials dockside. They could only introduce low-pressure steam into the turbines because if they introduced full pressure into the turbines and the propellers started turning, not only would she move, but the dock she was tied up to would move along with her. But it was a big deal, and there was a lot of holding of breath as the steam was introduced into the turbines and the turbines began to turn and they didn't bind up. That was a relief. Here she is off the coast of Maine, November 3rd, and notice how clean she is. There are 2 turrets. There's an armored conning tower where the senior officers would be during battle, a smoke pipe, a couple of masts, 2 turrets, and that's it. Everything else was below the main deck. So very clean lines. And you'll see that change as time goes on. By the way, the smoke was an indicator of an engine room crew that needed work. Ideally, you do not want smoke because smoke signals your presence to the enemy. So they would work on that over the years. I love this picture. Look off to the right. There's a little vessel here. Nevada's charging along at 19.5 knots. Whoever's on this boat is in for a really rough ride in about 8 seconds after this picture was taken. Now, what Nevada needed, okay, it went through trials. The trials went brilliantly. There were a few odds and ends. Bearings overheated, pump failed, but in general, things went very well during trials. What she needed was a captain. And this was the most sought out billet in the Navy, the most modern battleship in the world. And the honor went to Commander, then Captain William Soden Sims. Sims was a legend at the time and became even more of a legend. Talk about troublemaker. On his midshipman's cruise when he was at the Naval Academy, which he got in sort of kind of barely, he wrote the Secretary of the Navy that he didn't like the accommodations on the ship that he was on. Then, when he was assigned in the Far East, he wrote the Secretary and anybody else who would listen, and they weren't listening very well. So he wrote the President about gunnery and target practice, and he thought the British had a better system. So Teddy Roosevelt was sufficiently impressed that he talked to the Navy, and they made him director of target practice. So here's a guy who criticized the Navy for not shooting straight, and the Navy said, okay, you're now responsible for teaching the Navy to shoot straight. So it was Sims that taught the United States Navy to shoot straight, became a naval advisor for Teddy Roosevelt, commanded the battleship Minnesota, thanks to Teddy, and then when it came time to choose a commanding officer for Nevada, Sims was chosen for that. She was commissioned on Saturday, March 11th, 1916. They were in a big hurry. World War I was on. They wanted the ship in the fleet as soon as possible. There was still a little bit more to do. It's interesting reading the letters from the naval official who was responsible at the shipyard, responsible for overseeing. It starts out, oh, things are going well, you know, I'm here, and so by the end of the construction, he's at the end of his rope. I mean, this man needed care. He just at the end of his tether, but he got it done. And she was commissioned on a Saturday because she didn't commission ships on a Sunday at that time. And the next day was the 13th, so with a superstitious Navy, we're not doing it then. And then the next opportunity was Tuesday, so in an exchange of telegrams, they said, what the hell, just do it today. So once Sims got on board, and by the way, Sims wasn't there at the commissioning because he was testifying before Congress in Washington, which had to be supremely frustrating. But once he got on board, he instituted the Sims way of running a ship. Captain Sims would appear anywhere, anytime, impeccably dressed, and talk to the sailors about what they're doing and the importance of what they're doing. And he had a favorite poem called Cheer Up. Not all of us can be handsome, and not all of us can be... So it went on to say, but we do the best we can. And that's all he wanted out of his men, do the best you can. And he had this printed up on little cards positioned around the ship, and that became the first nickname of the ship. It was the Cheer Up ship. He was a dedicated tea drinker. He called tea the warrior's beverage, and he was appalled that they were making tea in shell casings and toothbrush glasses and stuff like that. So he wrote to the Navy and said, I got to have a proper tea service on a first-class battleship. So the state of Nevada sent him a tea service, which was made from 300 pounds of Nevada silver and gold, and you can see that at the museum in Reno. Right after the commissioning, ship was open to the public, and she was a modern marvel. There was an all-electric galley, and this was at a time when most people heated their homes by coal or wood. The British would have loved to have her in Europe, but she was oil-fired, and the British didn't have a source of oil. They had coal. So it wasn't until 1918 that she was assigned to Queenstown, Ireland, to protect U.S. convoys crossing the Atlantic. And she did indeed do that mission. There was a scare that German surface ships had broken out of the British blockade, so Nevada went out to protect a troop convoy coming across the Atlantic. Here's a slightly lower angle shot. You see the deck's getting a little more cluttered with boats and other bric-a-brac. The crew had a great time in Ireland, very good relations with the British, loved Irish beer, but in general, discipline was good. And Nevada had a long record of an excellent record of discipline of crews on shore, and that's partly due to Sims. She had one more escort duty at the end of the war. At the right is George Washington carrying President Wilson to the peace talks, and there is Nevada performing that last bit of escort duty. She returned to New York, arriving Christmas Day, and on December 26th, the nation threw a party for the fleet. The New York Times reported that, quote, every craft in the harbor which had a whistle joined in a noisy welcome, which was reinforced by the cheers of the tens of thousands who witnessed the spectacle from Battery Park, from the windows of tall buildings, and from pierheads. Secretary of the Navy Josephus Daniels stood on the deck of the Mayflower for hours with his hat off. It was snowing, it was bitter cold, reviewing the ships as each ship played the national anthem as the Mayflower went by. Now you might think, after the war, time to relax, and here's some sailors relaxing on deck in 1919. But peace brought an intensive series of exercises to reinforce the lessons that were learned in the war. And target practice. Here's a secondary gun in action. There's a notion of, gee, battleships, you would think, gee, are they air-conditioned? No, not at this time. And they were hot, because our training ground was off Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. So these guys didn't have shirts on. This guy didn't have shoes on. I don't know where the petty officer was, but I don't think that was an approved uniform. By the way, a good crew could get off a shot every 6 seconds. So this was hard work for them. There's a notion that between the wars, the Navy was run by a bunch of battleship admirals, people that weren't thinking about the future and didn't understand airplanes. The Navy was one of the most innovative organizations in the world at that time. They understood the potential for aircraft. They fitted, quote, flying off platforms. You see that airplane on the top of one of the turrets? The runway was 50 feet long, because the ship would run up to maximum speed. The aircraft would spin its propeller as fast as it could, and 50 feet was enough to lift off for that. It was, however, a one-way trip. So you either landed on land or you ditched in the sea. The Navy was advocating escort carriers as early as 1919. They weren't funded for a while after that. But the writing was on the wall. Billy Mitchell showed that even the flimsy bombers of the day could sink an aircraft, could sink a battleship. This was the Ostfriesland German battleship that was taken in after the war. But it was anchored, and it wasn't firing back, and it wasn't maneuvering. And the Navy thought, what we really need is what they called at the time sky guns, anti-aircraft guns. And it was a time of tremendous experimentation in strategy and tactics for the Navy. Here's Nevada with sister ship Oklahoma in the background. And the resolution of the photo isn't quite good enough. It looks sort of kind of like Arizona back there, but this is certainly Nevada and Oklahoma. In 1921, there was a lot of battleship diplomacy at this time, not the kind of battleship diplomacy you think of, but battleships were sent places to show the flag and to show goodwill and to show respect. So Nevada was sent to Peru in 1921 for the centenary of their independence. It was part also of join the Navy and see the world, because they wanted to keep sailors on the ship for a prolonged period of time. And while they were in Lima, the Peruvians, who were thrilled at the visit of the fleet, said, oh, we'll host a bullfight for the sailors. Oh, great. So the sailors all trooped up to Lima from the coast, and they were not impressed. So they started to root for the bull. Who is this guy all dressed up taunting this bull? So they were rooting, go bull. It wasn't all smooth seas. Here's guns trained to starboard in heavy seas. They were doing a lot of war games at the time, and they did board games at the Naval War College, and this was what Admiral Sims had, an innovation that he started at the War College. But it's one thing to do wargaming in the comforts of the Naval War College. It's another thing to do it at sea, when mechanical breakdowns, weather, human error, communications failures, other things could affect real battles. And this is around the time of one of those fleet problems. Now, Nevada's first brush with death came with the Washington Naval Conference. Warren G. Harding was elected president with the notion of a return to normalcy. That's a code word for isolationism. We had two enormous oceans to protect us. Why do we need a big navy? And it cost a lot of money. And he was also, to say the least, frugal. But the United States couldn't give up its navy unless other countries gave up their navy. So he engineered the Washington Naval Conference. And it was a media event. First of all, he announces it in the newspaper, so other countries, if they didn't come, it's sort of be there or be square. So he's forcing the other countries to come. There were thousands of people lining the streets in Washington to see David Lloyd George and Aristide Briand, the French premier, Japanese princes, and other very famous people come. Anybody who was anybody was in the hall that day to watch the opening. Secretary of State Charles Evans Hughes opened with an electrifying speech. Amongst other things, he proposed a 10-year holiday in battleship construction, limits on tonnage, and so forth. The British were appalled, the Japanese were appalled, literally open-mouthed during Hughes' speech. They had no idea it was going to turn out this way, but Nevada survived. And in a way, this treaty had a benefit. The treaty said we're going to scrap all of the American battleships building. Some of them were almost done, almost ready to enter the fleet. So they scrapped them. They scrapped all the older battleships. The New York Times, I think it was the New York Times, reported that that treaty scrapped more ships than all the admirals of the past several centuries or something like that. But because we were short on ships, that meant we had to use each ship as effectively as possible. Now, at the end of the First World War, during the First World War, the Japanese had taken the German colonies. So they had these colonies in the Pacific. We had colonies in the Pacific. There was not a lot of love lost between the two countries at that time. So the United States Navy had the thought, we want to demonstrate that we can project force anywhere in the Pacific if we want to. So they came up with something called the Great Cruise of 1925. Obviously, they couldn't go to Japan. So they went to Australia. It involved almost every ship, a large ship in the Navy, more than 75 ships, and they took everything they would need to fight and win a war on the other side of the Pacific. Food, fuel, they took a hospital ship, spare parts, they stopped in San Francisco, big parades, whatnot, stopped in Honolulu, big parades, hula dances, then went on to Australia, and along the, well, let me do one more thing. Let me show you the commanding officer and the executive officer. On the left is the commanding officer, David Todd. I have never seen a gruffer, tougher portrait of a naval officer than David Todd. And then there's the real nice guy, executive officer, William Bagley, next to him. You can draw your own conclusions, but I don't want you to be too harsh on Captain Todd because he's going to be one of the best friends that Nevada has in a little while. Now, on the way to Australia, they cross the equator, of course, and when you cross the equator, there's King Neptune's court, where you initiate landlubbers into the order of shellbacks. And this is a big deal. The ships stop, mid-Pacific. They lift the line over the mast. King Neptune comes on board by magic. He comes on all the ships at the same time, and he holds court. For that time, King Neptune is in command of the ship. And they hold, that court has two meanings. The judicial meaning had a special thing. So they had this long, everybody in the ship that hadn't crossed the equator was in a long line, and they had scared the hell out of them for weeks ahead of time. So they get put in a barber's chair, and they're asked their name. They give their name, and they stuff this noxious mess in their mouth, shave them with a flour paste, and then dunk them backwards into a swimming pool when it's next. It was harder to do that for Captain Todd, a little embarrassing. He had not crossed the equator, so they fined him a box of cigars. Melbourne went wild. Melbourne, Australia went wild with the arrival of the U.S. fleet. The Melbourne Age newspaper reported, quote, "Australia welcomes the great American fleet with feelings that thrill the fibers of our national being." They wrote poems. More invitations came onto the ship than they had men to accept the invitations. This was a diplomatic problem. We don't have anybody left. Just tremendously popular. At a dance, people were pulled through portholes. Women were pulled through portholes. Lieutenant Wheeler, who would retire as an admiral, said, "It was the only time I've ever known in the Navy when we lost control of a ship." So, needless to say, there were fond farewells. Admiral Kuntz, who was in command of the fleet, advised the men to make friendships quickly. The men obliged. There were several marriages during the 16-day stay. It was a relief to leave. They went to Wellington, New Zealand. They were a little less exuberant, not much, but a little. The cruise lasted 5 months, and they covered 16,000 miles. The first thing they did when they got back to the West Coast was start an intensive series of training exercises. This was a message to the Japanese. We steamed 16,000 miles. We're ready to go. Japan got the message, by the way. Now, the problem was, by early 1927, Nevada needed more than a periodic refit. She was just worn out. A lot of use. She needed modernization. First 8 months in 1927, the condenser on the port engine that condenses steam to make fresh water to feed back in the boilers failed at least 11 times. Starboard condenser failed at least 8 times. Boiler failures were chronic. Steering was always a problem with Nevada from the beginning to the end. She had 2 steering systems, electrical and steam. Neither one of them worked very well. It was a constant headache. Gun turrets were jammed, but the Washington Treaty said you can't build new battleships. So the only thing they could do is modernize the existing battleship. She arrived in Norfolk September 14, 1927. Most of the men transferred off, including the captain. But Captain Todd, I told you we'd hear from him again, was the commandant of the Navy Yard in Norfolk. So he worked with a new captain, Royale, to give Nevada a new lease on life. Most important, she got new turbine engines. She got them from North Dakota. They were relatively new. They were going to use North Dakota as a target ship. And Todd says, "Really? We have brand new engines there. Why don't we take them out of North Dakota, put them in Nevada?" They did. New boilers, completely new look above the main deck. She was essentially a new ship. But this was challenging. Nevada had 18-inch armor on the faces of her main turrets. One of the things they wanted to do was enable the guns to be raised. The former maximum was about 15 degrees. They wanted them to raise 30 degrees. That way she could shoot further. How do you enlarge openings in 18-inch thick armor? And there were various things that were proposed. Captain Todd, again, said, "Why don't you drill a whole bunch of holes real close to one another and then just grind off the burrs?" And it worked, and it maintained the strength. He also said, "I'd like to install steel frame bunks in place of hammocks." Until that time, sailors slept in hammocks. So he wrote to the Navy, and the Navy said, "No, it's too expensive. We're not going to pay for that." So then he writes back to the Navy, and he says, "Well, I've already spent most of the money associated with the steel hammocks. Can I finish this?" The Navy writes back, "This item is not now definitively disapproved." So then, Captain Royale gets on the act and he says, now that we have these steel frame bunks, can we buy mattresses and sheets and pillows to put on it? And the Bureau of Construction Repair had a humor failure. They not only said no to him, but they made a special attempt to inform his commanding officer that they were saying no and he was playing games. But Nevada came out of this as a new ship, a beautiful ship. You notice those, what are called cage masts are gone. She's now got tripod masts. She's got good fire control stations on top because she's going to shoot a lot further. She's got 3 spotting planes, superstructure. They took all the guns off the hull mountings because they got wet anyway and put them up on the deck. She's a new ship. For all practical purposes, she's a new ship. The problem was, one of the improvements, quote, improvements they made, they put a so-called torpedo blister. That is, they put this outer shell 3 feet from the hull so that if a torpedo hit it, it would explode and not damage the main hull. That meant she just about fit through the Panama Canal. More significantly, it played havoc with steering. So she's getting ready to go through the Panama Canal, and she's going through one of the approaches, and the captain orders a slight rudder change, and nothing happens. Uh-oh. So he throws out the anchor. Anchor chain runs out, grabs. By the time it's done, she is perpendicular to the canal. This is really embarrassing. Then it gets worse. She starts to go through a canal. She's almost uncontrollable below 6 knots. She's bumping her way through the Panama Canal. She gets to the other side. Thank goodness. They drop the anchor, lose the anchor chain. So this is not a good day for Captain Royale, but it did get better. They did break the world record in gunnery. Sims would be proud. During the 1930s, she spent about a third of her time at sea, about a third of her time in port, about a third of her time in maintenance or overhaul or something like that. The Navy had started a series of fleet problems. You know, I mentioned that they did these exercises with almost the entire fleet. Fleet problem 15 in 1934 was very exciting for Nevada. Captain Stanton was in command, and they were in a battle line exchanging fire with the simulated bad guys. And they sustained a hit which reduced their speed to 12 knots. Now, the normal thing was get out of the battle line, steer away from the battle, and live to fight another day. Nah, not Captain Stanton. He steered toward the enemy, and he thought, I'll draw fire away from the main line. And he definitely did draw fire. He did a 12-knot charge on the enemy. He attracted fire. By the time he got within 9,000 yards, 3 turrets were deemed destroyed. He was deemed killed. He got within 1,735 yards of the enemy, and the enemy gave up and turned away. The fleet commander wrote a special letter to the fleet commending Stanton for his initiative. Now, life in the 30s was not so bad. For sailors. You know, it wasn't a cushy life. Ship's band, the Blue Devils, was always popular. Music was always popular. The shops could make just about anything you wanted. The laundry. You know, a lot of times you see pictures of ships and they show you at battle and stuff. There's a lot of other parts of the ship, too, a lot of other people that served. Laundry processed tons of materials. Most sailors did their laundry in a bucket, by the way, but the sick bay. The guy sitting in the chair is the man on duty. I'm not sure I'd want to be sick if he was on duty, but even less popular was the dentist. Thanksgiving, big affair, roast turkey, all the trimmings, appetizers, cigars and cigarettes afterwards. It was a lavish meal. This was one of the little Thanksgiving dinners. Some of them would have turkey, ham, this, that. It really was a lavish affair. And by gosh, when they were in in dry dock at Puget Sound and other places, the bakers just went crazy. They would bake hundreds of pies and cakes and things. But, for young people that were burning many thousands of calories a day, this was fine. But they could be well fed. Christmas, here you see enlisted people on the deck. Officers are going to hand out presents. See a big Christmas tree there. So it wasn't bad. And people could get on a ship and stay there for a very long period of time. It wasn't sort of a year or two on the ship. They could stay a decade or longer. It was their home. Now, that was about to change. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, Nevada was ready to fight. Some ships just are lucky ships. Nevada is a lucky ship. So she's just about to execute morning colors, and her band is all assembled on the quarterdeck. The baton comes down to start the national anthem, and Ensign Taussig notices there's an unusual plane coming our way. Then he notices it just dropped a torpedo. This ain't right. So he ran up to the public address system and called battle stations, this is no drill, etc. And then the bugler was going to start. He said, the hell with that, threw the bugle overboard, and then climbed up to his duty station. But there were enough men on the ship. Not only were there enough men on the ship to man all the anti-aircraft guns, they were manned at the time. Because just before the attack, the 5-inch anti-aircraft guns had become their daily fire control exercise. So they were all powered up, the ammunition boxes were ready, everything was ready to go. Machine guns were manned. The captain had mandated they be manned while they were in port. So Nevada fired at the first plane that flew by. At 3 minutes past 8, Quartermaster Robert Sedbury orders the engine room to make all preparations for getting underway. He didn't need no officer to tell him that he was at war, so we're gonna move the ship. The band, by the way, continued to play. They played really fast. And then there was no regulation. What do you do when you're playing the national anthem and the country goes to war? So they said, all right, we're going to keep at it. They finished playing. They packed up their instruments very carefully, and then they went to their battle stations. Nevada was the only battleship to get underway at Pearl Harbor. The engine room, not the first time, the engine room just worked miracles. It wasn't a case of, well, it's going to take 45 minutes to raise steam and this, that, and the other. No. Hold in those breakers. I don't care what the book says. You're going to send that steam to the turbines as soon as it can turn that turbine. So they did that. They started moving very quickly. Meanwhile, a torpedo hit by the bow, ripped a 16 by 27 foot hole in the hull. A 5-inch gun crew prevented a second torpedo hit on the ship by scoring a direct hit on the incoming aircraft. The notion is that they hit the torpedo. Arizona was directly ahead, and when she blew up, a sea of burning oil came towards Nevada. So Sedbury said, we got to get out of here real fast. We can withstand hits, but we can't be in a sea of burning oil. Nevada's sister ship, Oklahoma, was torpedoed, rolled over after multiple torpedo hits. That was a shock to the system because there was competition between the crews, but she was the sister ship. So to see Oklahoma roll over was a shock. Chief Bosun Mate Edwin Hill led a party down the gangway, jumped in the water, swam over to the place where they tied up, and released the cable, swam back. He was not about to be left out of the action. Backed out. They passed so close to Arizona that one officer said he could have lit a cigarette from the heat. Sailors were shielding ammunition with hoses or sometimes with their own bodies, shielding the ammunition from the heat. They picked up survivors as they could. A lot of the survivors immediately got on the ship, dripping wet, ran over, and started manning guns. But the sight of a moving battleship in the channel attracted Japanese planes like bees to honey. Now, the Japanese had used a silhouette of Nevada, full-size silhouette of Nevada, to practice bombing. So they know exactly what she looked like. And 5 bombs hit shortly after 9 o'clock. Edwin Hill, who swam to release the cables, was killed in the bomb attack. One went right through the hull before exploding, pushing the hull plates in, caused major flooding. Another destroyed the captain's quarters. The captain went back and found the sword that his parents had presented him at graduation at the Naval Academy. The petty officers were in tears. One bounced off the armor deck, blew the main deck up. I'll show you that in a second. Fires broke out. The ship started to flood, not so much from the battle damage. There was poor watertight integrity in the bulkheads. They knew this. There were openings for wiring and voice tubes, and they didn't have watertight doors everywhere, and the water just seeped through, and Nevada was slowly sinking. So Lieutenant Thomas, who was in charge, chose to ground her in shallow water to aid recovery. Through the day, 29 men killed and 100 wounded. Here is the damage to the forward deck. You see the deck blown up. Crew galley was destroyed. But February 18th, they tried various kinds of patches, and they did put patches in. But then they decided, let's just bring every pump we can find, put it on a ship, pump like crazy, and hope for the best that we can get her across the harbor into dry dock. It worked. A lot of the crew had already been removed for duty elsewhere in the war. Some remained. And somewhere during this time, the cheer-up ship got another nickname, and that is the Old Maru. And it was a wonderful term of affection. Ships have nicknames, and some of them are not very kindly. Nevada's nicknames were always terms of affection. The cheer-up ship, the Old Maru, Old Imperishable. This was a ship that was loved. Admiral Nimitz visited on April 7th to give out awards for heroism. And he said, quote, "If a ship has a personality and a soul, and I am convinced that she has, what a proud moment this must be for this gallant ship." A few months later, she's on her way to Puget Sound for her second modernization. Now, there was some doubt. Should we modernize this old battleship? The chief of naval operations personally made the decision. He said, yeah, we're going to modernize Nevada because she's a great bombardment platform for coming invasions. They took out the armored conning tower because she wasn't going to be in a line of battle with other battleships. They put in anti-aircraft. If there was a surface on the ship, flat surface, it had an anti-aircraft gun on it, either a 5-inch gun or 40 millimeters and quad mounts, 20 millimeters. There was a sense of urgency to get this ship in the fleet now. So they didn't have enough copper for the switchboard. So they thought, oh, silver does almost as well. So they took tons of silver and put it in the electrical switchboard. So talk about the Silver State Dreadnought. Yeah, she was the Silver State Dreadnought. Crew complement doubled. That was a slight challenge for fresh water. But less than 8 months after she sank, Nevada's ready for war. Here she is at Puget Sound. Admiral Nimitz already had a mission picked out for her. The Japanese had attacked and invaded Attu and Kiska in the Aleutian Islands. This didn't sit real well with the American people. They said, we want that American land back. So she did some training in Southern California and then headed north. The Navy did everything it could to obscure where she was going. So they put up maps of South America. They gave lectures on tropical diseases. A few days out of port, the crew realized we ain't going to no tropical isles. And then the cold weather gear was broken out. This was miserable duty. Ice covered everything. You couldn't stay below deck. There were destroyers to refuel, weapons to be tested. Admiral Francis Rockwell chose Nevada as his flagship to support the invasion of Attu, which is a further complication. You got an admiral on board. Here she is steaming off Attu. Notice no smoke. in a battle zone. She laid down a bombardment for a very difficult landing. This was one of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific War. Admiral Rockwell was a tough guy. So they knew Japanese submarines were in the area, and the charts that they had were not very accurate. So you'd be going by, and suddenly there would be this rocky pinnacle right next to the ship. So they're very concerned about both natural and man-made hazards. But he wanted Nevada to be close inshore. So one of his officers correctly said, "Sir, there are submarines in the area. We've seen torpedoes in the water. Shouldn't we be moving towards deeper water?" So the admiral growls, quote, "Screw the torpedoes, slow speed ahead." He wanted to be right there. So invasion was successful. She went back to San Francisco for a little R&R. Also, the troops had some R&R. And then she went south to the canal, and then convoy duty in the Atlantic. Now, by this time, the crew is saying, "Can't we go someplace warm?" She was admirably suited to convoy duty because her cruising speed of about 12 knots or so was suited to the speed of a convoy, and she could take on anything the Germans could throw at her at the time. But weather conditions in the North Atlantic were unpleasant, to say the least, and even if you're in a 30,000-ton battleship, this is a tough voyage. Here is Captain Rhea on the bridge. It's cold out there. But at the end of the convoy duty, she was slated to provide support for the greatest amphibious invasion in history, and that, of course, is D-Day. Here's an officer explaining what's going to happen with the crew. The bombardment force was split into two parts, one for Omaha, one for Utah Beach. Nevada was going to Utah. The approach was supposed to be marked by buoys, but some of the buoys didn't light up and others sort of drifted off, so she used radar to get to the right position. And her job was to remove the big guns inland that were going to cause a problem for the advancing troops. Both in the Atlantic and the Pacific, church service went way up just before battles. D-Day, she's opening up. Targets were prioritized, starting, as I mentioned, with inland artillery. Then they were going to blast holes in the Atlantic wall. This was a literally concrete wall that the Germans had built to prevent invasion. Gunfire was guided by ship spotters for close-in targets, land observers, including some from Nevada, and then aircraft-directed fire. The Germans picked up the fleet on radar, started shelling. Admiral Deo, who was in charge of the bombardment force, was supposed to hold fire, and he said, "I think the Germans know we're here." So he just started firing 14 minutes early. The Germans, of course, targeted the biggest ship, Nevada. They straddled her on the first salvo, could not hit this ship. She opens up with her main battery at target 17,000 yards inland. Fires armor-piercing shells at the seawall, blew it to pieces. At some point, she was firing horizontally, so men on the landing craft could hear the whoosh of shells go over. That's how close she was. Secondary batteries were firing at a lightning pace. You can see the shell casings on the upper right. By 2 minutes past H hour, the secondary batteries, the 5-inchers, had fired 1,440 rounds of munitions. Now, these were 55-pound shells with a 28-pound powder bag, and they were firing them every 6 seconds. This was work. It came up, the ammunition hoist had to be put into the guns. Mounts 2 and 5 set a fleet gunnery record by each shooting 300 rounds in a 25-minute period. This is just amazing. Sailors rested it anywhere they could in the gun mounts. Secondary guns would fire targets. They'd stop. 14-inch guns would take over. Secondary guns would take over. By midnight, they had fired 69 rounds of armor-piercing 14-inch, 268 rounds of high-capacity 14-inch, and 2,693 rounds of 5-inch. Here's Captain Rhea and Executive Officer Yeager on the bridge. Just one vignette of the kind of targets she took on. June 8th, a tank column was approaching American troops. Nevada opens up with the 14-inch guns. She broke up the column. Then she started targeting individual tanks and trucks. Now, these are miles inland. Not a single vehicle survived. She did a quick trip back to England to rearm, and then she's back in the action at Utah and then at Omaha. Other just terrific stories associated with the precision of her gunnery. But the Germans weren't idle at Cherbourg. They had had enough of Nevada. So they got Nevada's range, and salvos started to straddle the ship. They could not hit this ship to save their life. Water from shell splashes were drenching the deck. Shell fragments were raining down on the deck, clanking off of the turrets. Some shells landed within 25 yards of the ship, and they were saying, how did this shell get there without hitting the ship? But they didn't. Now, but by this time, things are getting really hot, so Captain Rea decides to get out of Dodge. Nevada's blasting along through the water at 20.4 knots. Now, after they put the torpedo blister and other odds and ends in, her speed went down. She was now making almost the same, a full knot higher than the maximum speed she had ever achieved before, and almost at her original 1916 design speed. This is another example of the engine room crew. They know how to run this ship. And it was around this time that she got her third nickname, which was Old and Perishable. This ship is just not going anywhere. She went to southern France. She opened up on various targets. Most interesting, she engaged in a one-on-one gun duel with a French battleship, the Strasbourg. The Germans had taken the ship and converted it into a gun platform, and they sent it out against Nevada. And Nevada said, okay, this is why I was designed. I'm all set for this. She sank Strasbourg. They got back to Norfolk. New captain, Captain Rea in the Atlantic, Captain Homer Grosskopf, also called Pop Grosskopf, replaced Captain Rea. And one of his first tasks was to distribute silver coins from the state of Nevada. The governor said we wanted to recognize the crew of our ship and sent a coin for every member of the crew, and they made them into belt buckles and medallions and all sorts of things. She headed to the Pacific. She had a lot of roles, including fueling destroyers. They had a small fuel capacity. She could store a lot. Did some training in San Pedro, then headed out to Pearl. She moored in berth F6, which was just ahead of the Arizona. And from the fantail, sailors could see the tomb of over 1,000 shipmates and the rainbow pattern that you can still see today of oil leaking from the hull. She departed Pearl at 7:30 on January 10th, and she had a score to settle. Here she is off of Iwo Jima. Captain Rogers chose Nevada as his flagship for the Iwo Jima invasion. She got there February 16th, 3 days before the planned invasion, went right into position, 12,000 yards offshore, opened up with the main battery, but visibility was awful. So it was sort of on and off again during the day. Captain Grosskopf was covering mine-sweeping operations, so you did mine-sweeping, and then you sent in the demolition teams to remove obstacles, and then you sent in the landing forces. The Japanese responded with artillery. One got within 15 yards of Nevada, didn't hit. Next, the next day, Nevada went at it with her 14-inch battery, dug out some ammunition dumps. Very satisfying explosion was reported. And it was very much a case of identify target, destroy target, next target. It was very much a mechanical thing. So she paved the way for the invasion of Iwo Jima. On landing day, the battleships were ordered to withdraw. Well, Captain Grosskopf said, I'm not in the way. I'm just going to stay here. Partly because the landing craft and even the day before that with the demolition teams were under heavy fire, and he wanted to give them all the support that he could. So he got within 2,400 yards ashore. This is pretty close for a ship to be offshore. The Japanese shot back. They got close, but they didn't hit. Last day before the invasion, moved within 2,500 yards. They fired every gun that had the range, including the 40 millimeters, attacking troop formations on the island. Here she is with the landing craft. She was so close to shore that mortars were firing on her. There was a particularly difficult blockhouse that was threatening the Marines' advance, and the 5-inchers just couldn't take it out. So he ordered high-capacity rounds, big explosive rounds in the 14-inch guns. They blew away the sand but didn't penetrate the concrete. So he ordered 14-inch armor-piercing rounds in the guns, and they blew it to pieces. Here Nevada got something that wasn't really a nickname, but was frequently applied to her. She became the sweetheart of the Marines. She was there to protect the Marines when they were going on shore. And there was criticism of, this is a capital ship, you're so close to shore. And Pop Grossclough said, I'm a battleship. This is what we're designed to do, so we're going to go close in. And one of his favorite phrases, as reported, was, take her in another 1,000 yards. Get as close as they possibly could. Here's Admiral Deo watching things through binoculars. Problem was, shortly after that, the kamikaze attacks started. Lieutenant Swanee reported, about 1100, Japanese Zeke broke through the mist just above the water, and we detected it off our stern, some 8,000 yards off. Air defense was sounded, but we were already at battle stations, where we spent most of our time during the Iwo campaign. Sky 4, the 5-inch director after the main mount, was assigned to take the Zeke under fire. Lieutenant Dave Thomas, the control officer, calmly placed the director on target, and the rangefinder operator began sending ranges to the computer. Yes, they had computers. With a signal from the computer that they were on target, the 2 5-inch mounts on the port side were put into automatic. The computer took over until Dave gave a commence firing to the men on the mounts. They shot 38 rounds of 5-inch projectiles in just 21 seconds. The Japanese plane broke apart and fell flaming into the sea. Now, kamikaze attacks were serious risks. This is ammunition stacked on the deck. They took ammunition when they could get it from other ships, or sometimes when they could stop at a nearby island. And this was a tense affair when the decks were loaded with ammunition. By March 7th at Iwo Jima, the bombardment force had done as much as it could. They delivered over 10,000 tons of ordnance on the island. An invasion that planned to take a few days took a month. Admiral Nimitz remarked that at Iwo Jima, quote, uncommon valor was a common virtue, unquote. There were lighter times. Pie eating contests were popular, hands behind your back and who can eat the pie fastest. The officers had a slightly more sedate dining experience. In the wardroom, they had everything they could want except for liquor. You could get that. There was a recreation island, in very loose terms, Mogmog. The great naval historian Samuel Eliot Morrison wrote, and I quote, one could hardly walk a step ashore without kicking an empty beer can. Each sailor got 2 chits, but there was a hot market in chits. Dances were also very popular. But there were very few women on the island, so most sailors danced with one another, and they danced to the tunes of Ray Anthony's band. Music was a big thing on the ship. As entertainment for the men to calm people down, the musicians were very highly regarded. Here's Pop Grosscroft on the bridge at Okinawa, where they went after Iwo Jima. There were no illusions as to how difficult Okinawa was going to be. Iwo Jima was bad enough. The Japanese studied the problems, and they really put up some serious defenses on Okinawa. Morton Deo, who had commanded the bombardment force at Normandy, had assembled the most powerful fleet ever assembled for an invasion bombardment fleet. 10 battleships, 10 cruisers, 32 destroyers and destroyer escorts, and every one of them was used. The old Maru had just gotten to town, and there was a submarine 2,000 yards off the bow. Torpedoes were in the water. This was not looking good. Nevada opens up on Okinawa the morning she arrived. Weather was terrible again, fired a few shots and then suspended. Deo said, "We're going to call it a day," and retire to the relative safety of the open water. That safety was relative. After he had a meal of peanut butter, toast, and coffee, Lieutenant J.G. O.A. Granum received word of a kamikaze attack, and this is his story. "I hit the PA speaker system, cut in the officer's circuit, and repeated twice the familiar, 'Now all hands man your air defense stations, man your air defense stations.' The bugler sounded air defense, the general alarm sounded. Anti-aircraft guns opened up on a plane coming at Nevada from almost dead astern. Black puffs from the 5-inch rounds filled the sky, seemed to block out the sun. The plane burst into flames and crashed. Then he saw a kamikaze, quote, coming in high through the cloud cover over the starboard bow. He headed for the bridge just as the 5 inches opened fire. Every gun that could bear started shooting. An emergency turn was ordered to try to get the ship out of the way of the plummeting plane. Gunners exhibited nerves of steel as they calmly fired in the kamikaze, which appeared to be coming right at them. Then, through the smoke, the 40s and 20s found him and started to cut him to pieces. When the scream of the plane became as loud as the clatter and rap of the guns, I assumed it was time to gather round and hold a little prayer meeting. The anti-aircraft guns tore a wing off, set the plane afire, but its momentum carried the burning wreck forward, and at 06:22 it crashed on Nevada's main deck aft next to turret 3. Only the ship's emergency turn prevented the bridge from being hit. 9 men were killed, 47 were severely wounded, 2 of whom would later succumb to their wounds. It was the first damage that Nevada had taken since Pearl Harbor. The injured men were lined up on deck. Medics quickly separated the most serious cases. Some of the casualties had been inside a turret, and the shrapnel had come in through the openings, gun openings. Among the dead were the 20-millimeter gun crews who kept firing until the plane collided with their mounts. Doctors worked hard. They transferred another doctor to the ship. Some crewmen had the responsibility of collecting pieces of shipmates from the deck. The chaplains oversaw the fingerprinting of the dead to ensure proper identification. The wounded were transferred off the ship to a hospital ship, and there was just tremendous care of the crew in taking care of these people. They found the remains of the pilot, that's in the background there, and the flag. When intelligence officers searched the Japanese pilot's body, they found that he had been carefully washed and powdered prior to the trip. Sailors didn't know what to think. One of them stood over the Japanese pilot and said, we hate you, you killed some of our own." The ship itself sustained relatively light damage. 3 20-millimeter guns were demolished. Turret 3 was riddled with shrapnel, and one of the aircraft was destroyed. Funeral services were held at 16:15 for the 10 enlisted men and 1 officer killed in the raid. Anybody that was not on duty crowded the deck and the superstructure to say farewell to their shipmates, knowing that but for fate it could have been him. The flag flew at half-mast as each body sewn into a canvas bag and covered with the American flag was committed to the deep. Even the toughest men fought to hold back tears. The remains of the Japanese pilot were afforded a similar honor. Just as the men had bowed their heads for their shipmates, they bowed them for the enemy warrior. Chaplain Marion Stevenson summarized the feelings of many when he said, and I quote, "While we as a nation can never understand nor condone the strange philosophy of the Japanese kamikaze, we as soldiers and sailors can understand the devotion to duty and the unflinching disregard for personal consequences which the enemy has shown. And to God, who made us all and will judge us all, is left this man alongside our own." One seaman wrote that Stevenson, quote, "taught us the relationship between fear, prayer, and a Christian attitude in battle." Fires were out within 5 minutes after the kamikaze hit. 4 20-millimeter guns damaged in the attack were back in operation within half an hour. They had a job to do. I mentioned numbers of how many shells she fired. She literally fired boatloads of shells. This is a auxiliary vessel carrying away shell casings from Nevada. She drenched the beaches with 14-inch, 5-inch, 40-millimeter, anything within range. She was firing at point-blank range, 2,000 yards offshore. They were firing as fast as they could. Anything of value on the shore was a target. But the Japanese were not idle. Groskopf, the Japanese were sending salvos out. Groskopf realized this was getting too close for comfort, ordered maneuvers to throw off the aim of the enemy, but it was too late. One shell hit port side aft on the main deck. Another hit the second deck, starboard side. Penetrated 5 bulkheads, exploded in a port side compartment occupied by a damage control party of 19 men. 2 were killed and the other 17 were wounded. Shells hit the stern crane, the aft radar, 20-millimeter mounts. Several blister compartments were flooded. Nevada had taken damage, but her guns were still firing. She was still a viable bombardment vessel, and she stayed until she had to go back for repairs at Pearl. When she got there, there were several returns to the ship. First, a Nevada state flag that was on the ship before Pearl Harbor was found in a trash bin. It was a very dynamic time. Found in a trash bin, and this was the first opportunity to return it to the ship. Another return was Lieutenant Donald K. Ross, who received the Medal of Honor for his heroism during the attack at Pearl Harbor. He was in the dynamo room on the attack, and he was responsible for keeping electricity on for the ship. Room filled with smoke, he passed out, they dragged him out. He insisted on going back, kept the electricity on until conditions in the forward dynamo room were just untenable. He then ran back through the ship to the aft dynamo room and kept power on to the ship, and for that he received the Medal of Honor. He had his pick of whatever command he wanted after he got his commission, and he chose to return to the old Maru. He returned to the old Maru a third time when his ashes were sprinkled over the site of the ship's sinking. The end of the war, sailors celebrating. Just before the end, Nevada left Pearl, stopped at the Marshall Islands for some target practice against some Japanese installations. And her new mission was to do heavy support for minesweeping in the East China Sea. This was boring work. Sailors weren't very excited about that. On August 8th, in between the dropping of the 2 atomic bombs, she headed for Leyte Gulf in the Philippines for 10 days of rest and recreation, except for attack of communicable diseases, which started, so most of the men had to stay on the ship. This was not a happy stop. The crew thought that they would surely be, the only battleship getting underway at Pearl Harbor, surely they would be included in the surrender ceremonies. Nevada was not, and that was a bitter disappointment. But what the crew did was they scraped all this yucky gray paint that had covered Nevada during the war and revealed the glory of her teak decks and brass. I love this picture. I don't know who this guy was, but he's having a good time. It's the end of the day. It's the end of the war. He's smoking a cigar. He's going home. Nevada participated in the Magic Carpet program, shows she ferried thousands of service personnel home at the end of the war. One time, she left the West Coast, went to Pearl Harbor, arrived in the morning, picked up troops, left that afternoon to take them back home. But then the last of those was late 1945, and in the following months, she went back to San Pedro and started offloading men and equipment as a prelude to laying up, or probably breaking up. Navy had other plans. Her service was not over. The atomic bomb had led to a rethinking of military strategy. In particular, what was the role of the Navy when only the Army Air Corps could deliver this new super weapon? There was intense competition between the services for the dwindling defense budgets. So the Navy decided to grab the bull by the horns and said, we're going to find out what the effect of atomic bombs are on ships. The result was Operation Crossroads. It was the most complex scientific experiment by far ever conducted up to that time. Nevada was chosen as ground zero. She was packed with scientific equipment to test the effect of an atomic blast on ships. She left San Pedro one more time for Pearl Harbor, May 8th, 1946. She berthed at, moored at berth F8, which was the same one she occupied at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. More equipment was installed. And then she steamed independently to Bikini Atoll, which was the location of the tests. Sailed all by herself, arrived May 20th. And she was one of 95 target ships. The original notion was, well, we'll take impounded Japanese and German ships and expose them. There weren't enough Japanese ships left at that time. Every one of the ships that was involved in the attack on Pearl Harbor was sunk, every single one, and many of the others that the Japanese had. However, she had some famous companions, the German cruiser Prinz Eugen of battleship Bismarck fame, the Japanese battleship Nagato, which actually for a time was thought to be in the line of battle against Nevada. She was with old sailing mates, cruiser Salt Lake City, battleships Pennsylvania and Arkansas. Equipment covered the deck. She had been painted an orange because she was to be the target for the bomber. First test was scheduled for July 1st, and leaving the ship was really hard for the crew. One petty officer who had been on Nevada since before the war knelt down on the quarterdeck and kissed the ship. And he said, "Goodbye, my friend," as he made his way towards the waiting boat. That was his home. Nevada led a charmed life. The bomber practiced, and on the day of the drop, they missed Nevada by 1,500 to 2,000 feet. Inspection teams came into the area that afternoon, found massive damage to the ships. One spectator wrote, quote, "The fleet looked as though it had returned from a quick trip to hell." But Nevada survived. For example, a lot of damage topside. An Army truck looked like a child's toy that had been stepped on. But Captain Adele, commanding officer at the time, wrote, "The overall condition of the ship is good." And it was, because below deck, you could have, within a relatively short period of time, gotten the ship going again. Baker, the next shot, was another matter. It was detonated 90 feet underwater and was expected to produce a much stronger shock wave than the Able test. What it did was instantly vaporize thousands of tons of water, creating an enormous bubble of superheated steam. The bubble broke the surface as a brilliant white dome. You've probably seen pictures of that, illuminated by the still hot products of the explosion. That big bubble then filled in. Water hit the center, created a column with an estimated 2 million tons of water with rock and coral. It was going up at 1 mile per second. Meanwhile, the shock wave was moving towards the steel hulls of the ship. But it was when that column of water collapsed back with all of that radioactivity in it that the problem happened, because it created a surge, and the surge washed over the ships. Look at the size of that cloud, and then you can just see the ships as sort of little bumps on the horizon. Radio-controlled boats with Geiger counters registered radiation 80,000 times higher than the maximum amount permitted for humans. Still, they went back into Bikini Atoll. On August 9th, Captain Adele led the first inspection party aboard Nevada. He found some compartments flooded. The shock wave had lifted heavy machinery off the mounts, including the heavy turrets off of their tracks, and there was just no way to clean the radioactivity off of the ship. It just permeated the entire fabric of the ship. So on August 26th, the ship's post office was decommissioned. A work party visited the following day to remove last-minute items. And then finally, on August 29th, 1946, USS Nevada was decommissioned as a United States naval vessel. She was towed to Pearl Harbor, where scientists learned everything they possibly could about the effects of an atomic bomb on a naval vessel. Ships, like those who sail in them, have personalities. Some lead charmed lives, others lead unhappy ones. Nevada was a happy ship and a lucky ship. Her sister, Oklahoma, was neither. She caught fire during construction. She rolled over at Pearl Harbor. She had collisions. Her commanding officer was relieved. And going across the Pacific after they righted her after Pearl Harbor, she sank just out of exhaustion. Nevada was not that way. She was never just another ship. All of her nicknames, as I've mentioned, the cheer-up ship, the old Maru, old imperishable, were all terms of affection. Twice she was given a new lease on life. She was just a lucky ship. At Pearl Harbor, Arizona blew up because of powder in her magazines. Nevada, they had emptied the powder the previous day, and they were planning to put new powder on that afternoon. The Germans couldn't score a hit when she was at Normandy. But time is the enemy that no warrior can defeat. Naval architecture had advanced beyond the best Nevada could offer. The atomic bombs had left her too radioactive for repair or even for scrap. So on July 26, 1948, the old Maru was towed out of Pearl Harbor, past the scene of her first sinking, to a point 65 miles southwest of Oahu, where the 15,000-foot depth of the water was considered a suitable repository for her radioactive steel. She was used as target practice for the fleet. And the Navy was characteristically thorough. First, they put demolition charges on the hull. They expected that to sink her. That didn't happen. They fired radio-controlled bat bombs. That didn't work. Most missed. Destroyers launched salvos, and you can imagine Nevada saying, "Really? Destroyers?" Next up was Iowa's 16-inch guns. Nevada stood her ground. Light cruisers Pasadena, Astoria, and Springfield went at her with 6-inch main batteries. The topsides was a shambles, but the armor held. Old Imperishable was defiantly afloat. Rockets from aircraft pounded her. The Navy was frankly frustrated. This ship wouldn't sink. So finally, they called out a torpedo strike from Barbers Point, and the same weapon that sank her on December 7th, 1941, sank her on July 31st, 1948. She listed to starboard after the torpedo hits, settled by the stern, and the sea claimed her at 14:34. It was dark inside the hull as she took the pounding. The galley was empty, and no hammock swung in the crew's quarters. After so many trials and tribulations and shifting from steam to electric steering and back again, her rudder was still. Never again would engineers turn over her turbines to ensure that she was ready to move on an hour's notice. Her fractured decks were covered in smoke, but no damage-controlled parties raced to the scene of her wounds. Perhaps her greatest indignity, no flag flew from her mast. Nevada had done her best for the country that built her and the men who loved her. If a ship has a soul, then Nevada surely loved them in return. She rests silently now in the Pacific, her grave undisturbed. But the old Maru lives in the hearts of all those who loved her and those she loved in return. Thank you for listening to this story. It's a remarkable ship and remarkable men who built and served on her. It was an honor to do the research for the Silver State Dreadnought. I read through the 35,000 pages of logbooks, and there were tens of thousands of pages of documents. And as I came to do that, I came to know her and to love her. I came to know the men and women who built her and the men who served on her. So I thank all of them, and especially I thank the old Maru for the privilege of knowing you. So thank you.